If you think fences are just meant to keep dogs inside, this video will completely change your perspective. The entire neighborhood held its breath when I finished building a 10-foot fence blocking the shortcut that Karen's family had been freely using across my property for 3 years. And trust me, her reaction was crazier than anything you'd see in the movie, from threatening to sue me to dragging the entire homeowners association board to my house in the middle of the night. But guess who had all the evidence and a perfect plan? Now she's not only lost her trail privileges, but also... Which state are you watching from? Comment below so I know. Now, let me start from the beginning. 6 months ago, my life changed dramatically when I inherited a 2-acre plot of land from my uncle in the quiet suburban neighborhood of River Oaks Estates. As a software engineer working remotely, I, Ethan Miller, was thrilled to escape the hustle and bustle of city life for some peace and quiet. The property was beautiful, partially wooded with a small stream running through the back portion, surrounded by well-maintained homes in an established community. I spent the first few weeks settling in, renovating parts of the house that needed updating, and exploring my new surroundings. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, offering waves and occasional small talk, though I noticed some curious glances as I went about making the property my own. Everyone except the Richardson family, that is. They never so much as nodded in my direction when our paths crossed, which struck me as odd in such a seemingly tight-knit community. Little did I know that my slice of paradise would soon become the battleground for a neighborhood war. About 3 weeks after moving in, I started noticing strange tire tracks cutting across my property, usually appearing early in the mornings. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it might be local maintenance vehicles. But then I began finding empty energy drink cans, snack wrappers, and other garbage scattered along what was clearly becoming a well-worn path through my land. The path ran from the cul-de-sac on the east side of my property, cutting diagonally across my backyard, and disappearing into the wooded area that led to the larger forest beyond. What bothered me most wasn't just the trespassing, it was the utter disregard for my property, as if my land was nothing more than public space. One Sunday morning around 6 a.m., I was jolted awake by the unmistakable roar of an ATV engine right outside my bedroom window. The noise was deafening. Clearly, whoever was riding had modified the exhaust to be as loud as possible. I jumped out of bed, threw on a robe, and rushed outside just in time to see a red four-wheeler disappearing into the woods at the back of my property, leaving behind fresh tire marks that tore up the soft ground of what had once been my uncle's carefully maintained garden. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. It was happening nearly every weekend, sometimes multiple times on the same day. The noise made working from home difficult, as my concentration was constantly broken by the roaring engine, especially on early weekend mornings when I'd hoped to enjoy some peace and quiet. After setting up a basic security camera, disguised in a birdhouse overlooking the most commonly used route, I confirmed my suspicions. A teenage boy was regularly driving his ATV across my land, using it as a shortcut to access the forest trails behind my property. Sometimes he was alone, other times with friends on their own vehicles, but the disregard for private property was consistent. The camera footage clearly showed the teen's face, and after asking around, I learned he was Jason Richardson, the 16-year-old son of Debbie Richardson, the vice president of our homeowners association and a prominent local real estate agent who lived in the largest house in the neighborhood. Great, I thought. I've been here less than a month, and I'm already on a collision course with the neighborhood power player. Being the non-confrontational person I am, I decided to handle this politely. I found Debbie's contact information on the HOA website and gave her a call. Mrs. Richardson? Hi, this is Ethan Miller, the new owner of the property at 47 Oak Lane. I wanted to talk to you about your son riding his ATV across my land in the early mornings. There was a brief pause before she responded in a sugary, sweet voice that immediately set off alarm bells. Oh, Ethan, so nice to finally speak with you. Yes, that trail has been used by the neighborhood for years, long before you moved in. It's practically a community access path at this point. Her tone shifted slightly as she continued. I'm surprised your uncle never mentioned it, but it's something of a tradition here in River Oaks. We call it a prescriptive easement in real estate terms. Once a path has been used long enough, it becomes a rite of passage. I was taken aback by her confident assertion, but managed to respond calmly. I understand, but according to my property documents and the land survey I had done before moving in, there's no registered easement on my property. Plus, the early morning noise is rather disruptive. Debbie's friendly facade cracked slightly. Listen, Ethan, we've all been very patient with the construction noise when you were renovating. This is how communities work. We give and take. Besides, as the HOA vice president, I can assure you that trying to block access won't be well received. The HOA has ways of making things difficult for homeowners who don't cooperate with neighborhood norms. The threat was thinly veiled, and I felt my blood pressure rising. I'll look into the legal aspects of this situation, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Thank you for your time. As I hung up, I realized I'd just been welcomed to suburban power politics, and apparently I was expected to roll over and comply. But that's not who I am. If Debbie thought she could intimidate me with her HOA position and vague threats, she didn't know who she was dealing with. I never thought that putting up a simple fence would turn me into the neighborhood's public enemy number one, at least in the eyes of the HOA queen, Debbie. But what she didn't know was that I had been quietly preparing for this battle all along. After my unsatisfying conversation with Debbie, I spent the next few weeks researching property laws, HOA regulations, and my rights as a landowner. I discovered there was no legally established easement on my property. The tradition Debbie spoke of had no legal standing. Without a recorded easement, I had every right to control access to my land. I also found that our HOA regulations had specific guidelines about fences, but nothing that would prevent me from building one within my property lines. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to take action. I hired a reputable fencing company and scheduled installation for the following weekend, coincidentally when I learned Debbie would be out of town at a real estate conference. The timing wasn't an accident. I wanted the fence up before she could mobilize any HOA. The crew arrived early Saturday morning and began installing a substantial wooden privacy fence along the section of my property where the makeshift ATV trail had formed. By Sunday afternoon, the job was complete. A 10-foot fence with private property, no trespassing signs placed at regular intervals. I took photos of the completed fence from every angle, documenting its compliance with HOA regulations. I had deliberately chosen materials and colors that matched the neighborhood aesthetic, making it harder for anyone to claim it violated community standards. The fence company foreman assured me they had built hundreds of fences in HOA-governed communities and knew exactly how to ensure compliance. This fence is bulletproof from a regulations standpoint, he told me as he handed over the completion paperwork. They'll try to find something to complain about, but legally you're in the clear. The fencing crew had also discovered something interesting while digging the post holes. Remnants of an old fence that had once marked this exact property line, suggesting my uncle had previously tried to establish this boundary. This was another piece of evidence that there had never been a legitimate easement or community understanding about access through the property. The peace lasted exactly until 6:30 Monday morning when I was awakened by frantic pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw a red-faced Debbie Richardson, still in what appeared to be yoga clothes, practically vibrating with rage. I grabbed my phone, opened my recording app, and answered the door. "Good morning, Debbie," I said calmly. What followed was a tirade that would have impressed a drill sergeant. "What the hell do you think you're doing building that monstrosity without HOA approval? My son couldn't get through to the trails this morning. You have no right to block a traditional access path. I've already called Steve from the HOA board, and you'll be receiving a violation notice and fine." I maintained my composure, keeping my phone visibly recording in my hand. "Debbie, I've reviewed the HOA bylaws thoroughly. My fence is fully compliant with height restrictions, setback requirements, and approved materials. As for the traditional path, there's no recorded easement on my property deed, which means it's simply trespassing." Her face contorted with even more fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You have no idea who you're messing with. I've been on this board for 15 years. I know everyone in this community and at City Hall. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you never bought this property." I remained unmoved. "Are you threatening me, Debbie? Because that sounds an awful lot like harassment, which is against HOA rules section 7.3 if I recall correctly." Before she could respond, another car pulled into my driveway. A silver Lexus I didn't recognize. A middle-aged man with thinning hair and an uncomfortable expression emerged. "Steve Williams," Debbie announced triumphantly. "HOA president. Let's see how smug you are now." Steve approached cautiously, clearly unhappy to be dragged into this situation so early in the morning. "Mr. Miller, I understand there's been some confusion about property access. I invited them both inside, thinking witnesses and more recording would only help my case." In my living room, Debbie continued her tirade while Steve examined the documents I had prepared. Property survey, HOA regulations regarding fences, and printed screenshots from my security camera showing Jason's repeated trespassing over the past month. As you can see, Steve, my fence is fully compliant with HOA regulations. I've highlighted the relevant sections, and these images show the regular trespassing that's been occurring, often before 7 a.m. on weekends, which also violates the HOA noise ordinances. Steve looked increasingly uncomfortable as he reviewed the materials, while Debbie's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "This is ridiculous. That path has been used for years. You can't just move in and change everything." Steve cleared his throat. "Debbie, it appears Mr. Miller has done his homework. The fence does comply with our regulations, and without a recorded easement..." Debbie cut him off. "So you're taking his side? After everything I've done for this community?" She turned to me, her voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "This isn't over, Miller. Not by a long shot. The HOA meeting is next Tuesday. We'll see what the community thinks about your compliance then." As they were leaving, Debbie paused in the doorway. "You know," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "it's strange how quickly house fires can happen in these old properties. Electrical systems are so unpredictable." Steve looked shocked, but she was already walking to her car. "Did you just threaten to burn down my house?" I called after her, making sure my phone was still recording. She waved dismissively without turning around. "Just making conversation about home safety." The implied threat was clear, and I made a note to upgrade my home security system along with the outdoor cameras. I knew Debbie was probably just trying to intimidate me, but her increasingly erratic behavior was becoming concerning. I immediately backed up the recording to multiple secure locations, sensing it might become important evidence later. After they left, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. I'd won this round, but Debbie's parting threat suggested the war was just beginning. As I was reviewing the recording of our interaction, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was an older gentleman with weathered features and kind eyes. "Name's Tom Jenkins," he said, extending his hand. "Lived 3 doors down, saw the Richardson hurricane blow through, and thought you might need a friendly face." Tom turned out to be a retired attorney who had his own history with Debbie and the HOA. Over coffee, he shared valuable insights about the neighborhood dynamics and Debbie's reign of petty tyranny. "She's used to getting her way," Tom explained. "Former local beauty queen who married rich, got divorced after her husband cheated, and has been wielding what power she can ever since. The HOA is her kingdom, and you just committed high treason." By the end of our conversation, I had gained not just information, but an ally. As Tom left, my phone buzzed with notifications. 3 separate text messages from neighbors I'd barely met, all warning me about a smear campaign Debbie was launching in the neighborhood social media group. I just smirked. The HOA queen was forgetting that I managed social media for a tech company. If she wanted a media war, I'd show her what going viral really meant. In the days leading up to the HOA meeting, Debbie was busy. Posts began appearing in the neighborhood online group, painting me as an anti-community troublemaker and a newcomer disrespecting neighborhood traditions. Some neighbors piled on, expressing outrage over my fence without knowing any of the facts. Others remained silent, probably fearing they'd become Debbie's next target if they supported me. I didn't engage directly with any of the posts, but I meticulously documented everything, taking screenshots of every defamatory claim. Tom kept me informed about the offline gossip, which was equally vicious. Debbie had apparently been going door to door, encouraging people to attend the upcoming HOA meeting to protect our community values from selfish new residents. I used the time to prepare even more thoroughly, gathering additional evidence and planning my presentation carefully. The night before the meeting, I received an unexpected email from Linda Cooper, the HOA secretary. "Be prepared," she wrote. "Debbie has added a special agenda item to vote on, forcing you to remove your fence for aesthetic violations. Bring all your documentation." Tuesday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center meeting room to find it unusually packed. Typically, according to Tom, HOA meetings attracted maybe 10 residents. Tonight, there were at least 40. I recognized Debbie holding court in the front row, surrounded by her supporters. Steve Williams called the meeting to order, looking even more uncomfortable than he had at my house. As the meeting progressed through routine business, I could feel the tension building. Finally, Steve announced, "Next item, discussion of aesthetic compliance concerns regarding the new fence at 47 Oak Lane, property of Ethan Miller." Debbie immediately jumped up. "I move that we vote to require Mr. Miller to remove his non-compliant fence within 7 days or face daily fines," she announced without preamble. A woman I didn't recognize quickly seconded the motion. Steve sighed. Mr. Miller, would you like to address the concerns before we put this to a vote? I walked to the front of the room carrying my folder of evidence. Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ethan Miller, and I'd like to clarify some misunderstandings about my property and the fence I recently installed. I connected my laptop to the projector and began a methodical presentation. First, I showed the HOA regulations regarding fences, highlighting how mine was fully compliant in terms of height, materials, placement, and even color. Next, I displayed my property survey and deed, emphasizing the absence of any recorded easement. Then came the evidence of trespassing. Security camera footage showing Jason's ATV crossing my property at 6:15 a.m. on multiple occasions, along with photos of the litter left behind. As you can see, I've experienced regular trespassing across my property, often at hours that violate the HOA noise ordinances. I installed a compliant fence to protect my property rights as any homeowner would. I paused, looking directly at Debbie. I've also documented the organized harassment campaign that followed, including defamatory statements on social media and in-person threats. The room fell silent. Then, from the back, a woman stood up. I'm Maria Martinez. Debbie reported us to the HOA 3 times when we painted our house a shade of beige she claimed wasn't approved, even though it was on the color palette. It took months and cost us hundreds of dollars to resolve. Another hand went up. The Johnsons. Debbie called the police on our daughter's 16th birthday party at 8 p.m. on a Saturday, claiming noise violations. When our permits were all in order, one by one, neighbors began sharing their own stories of Debbie's petty tyranny. The tide was turning, and Debbie could sense it. She jumped to her feet again. This is outrageous. We're here to discuss Miller's violation, not air unrelated grievances. He's blocking an established community path. Steve cleared his throat. Actually, Debbie, as Mr. Miller has demonstrated, there is no established easement on his property, and his fence does comply with our regulations. He looked around the room. Does anyone else have relevant information to share before we vote? Linda Cooper, the HOA secretary, spoke up. I've reviewed all the documentation Mr. Miller provided, as well as our HOA records. The fence is indeed compliant, and there has never been an official or unofficial easement recorded for that property. Debbie looked betrayed. Linda, how could you? Linda met her gaze steadily. I'm just stating the facts, Debbie. When the vote finally came, Debbie's motion was defeated, 35-5. The rejection was overwhelming, and Debbie's face showed she couldn't believe what was happening. As Steve wrapped up the meeting, Debbie stormed out, muttering loudly, "This isn't over. I'll handle this my way." Most people avoided making eye contact with her as she left. Several neighbors approached me afterward, offering support and apologizing for not speaking up sooner about Debbie's behavior. Linda Cooper lingered until the crowd thinned. "Ethan, be careful," she warned quietly. "Debbie doesn't take defeat well. She's done this to others before, and she plays dirty. If you need any information from the HOA records, let me know." I thanked her for the warning, feeling victorious but cautious. I had won the battle at the HOA meeting, but that was only round 1. Looking at Debbie's venomous expression as she left, I knew she wouldn't give up easily, and I was right. 3 days later, I returned home from grocery shopping to find my fence completely vandalized. The sections blocking the ATV trail had been knocked down, with a clear message spray-painted on the remaining posts: "Don't mess with Richardson." The damage to my fence was extensive and clearly deliberate. Several posts had been forcibly removed and the panels were smashed rather than simply pushed over. This wasn't just teenage vandalism, it was a calculated message. I called the police immediately and began documenting everything with photos and videos. Officer Ryan Parker arrived about 20 minutes later, a steady middle-aged cop with a seen-it-all expression. He walked the perimeter of the damage, taking notes and photos. "Any idea who might have done this, Mr. Miller?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already had suspicions. I explained the ongoing situation with Debbie Richardson and her son, showing him the previous security footage of Jason's trespassing and the threatening interactions with Debbie. "Ah, the Richardsons." Officer Parker nodded knowingly. "Mrs. Richardson has quite a reputation at the station. We've responded to numerous complaints filed by her against neighbors, most unfounded, and a few complaints against her as well." As he continued examining the scene, he paused at a distinctive tire track in the mud near the damaged fence. "That's an unusual tread pattern," he remarked. "Very specific type of..." While Officer Parker was still taking his report, two vehicles pulled into my driveway. Debbie's Mercedes SUV and Steve Williams's silver Lexus. They approached with contrasting demeanors. Debbie marching forward aggressively while Steve hung back, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Taking pictures of your handiwork?" Debbie sneered at me, ignoring Officer Parker. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she was implying. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "It's so obvious. You damaged your own fence to frame my son. A pathetic attempt to get sympathy after the community rejected your complaints." Officer Parker stepped forward. "Mrs. Richardson, I'm in the middle of an investigation here. Do you have information relevant to this vandalism?" Debbie's confidence faltered slightly at the official questioning. "I'm just pointing out the obvious. Nobody in our community would do something like this. He's clearly trying to stir up more drama after losing at the HOA meeting." "Actually," I interjected calmly, "I have something that might help your investigation, Officer Parker." I pulled out my phone and opened an app. After the previous incidents, I installed additional security cameras, including hidden ones covering the fence line. Debbie's expression froze as I continued. "This footage from yesterday afternoon shows two individuals on an ATV approaching my fence. One appears to be operating a chainsaw while the other uses what looks like a sledgehammer." I handed my phone to Officer Parker, who watched with interest. "The quality is quite good," he noted. "The faces are clearly visible." He looked up at Debbie. "Ma'am, one of these individuals bears a strong resemblance to your son, Jason." Debbie's face paled, then flushed with anger. That's absurd. Let me see that." She grabbed for the phone, but Officer Parker held it away. "Evidence in an ongoing investigation, ma'am." Debbie quickly shifted tactics. "Even if Jason was involved, which I'm not saying he was, he's just a boy. This is just neighborhood pranking, kids being kids. Vandalism causing thousands of dollars in damage and leaving threatening messages is not kids being kids, Mrs. Richardson," Officer Parker replied firmly. "It's criminal mischief, possibly escalating to criminal threats." He turned to me. "Mr. Miller, I'll need a copy of that footage for our investigation. Would you be willing to press charges if we identify the perpetrators?" Before I could answer, Debbie exploded. "This is harassment! You can't seriously be considering charges over a neighborhood dispute. My son is a respected teacher in this community." Officer Parker remained unruffled. "The law applies equally to everyone, Mrs. Richardson, regardless of their community standing." After taking my statement and collecting the evidence, Officer Parker informed us that he would continue the investigation and be in touch. He advised both parties to avoid contact with each other. As everyone was leaving, I noticed Steve Williams lingering behind. Once Debbie drove away, he approached me hesitantly. "Ethan, I'm sorry about all this. Things have gotten out of hand." He seemed genuinely distressed. "Debbie has a lot of influence in the HOA, but this crosses a line." After everyone left, I called Tom Jenkins to update him on the situation. "Not surprised," he said grimly. "When Debbie feels cornered, she escalates. But having the police involved changes things. She likes to operate in gray areas where she can deny responsibility." As we were talking, my phone dinged with an email notification from Linda Cooper, the HOA secretary. The subject line read, "Documentation you should see." The email contained several attachments: meeting minutes, internal HOA communications, and what appeared to be complaints filed against other residents who had crossed Debbie in the past. "I've been keeping records," Linda's message explained. "Debbie's abuse of power has gone on too long, and you're not the first victim. I can't publicly support you yet, but I want you to have this information." As I reviewed the documents, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my property rights anymore. I was potentially in a position to expose and end years of HOA corruption and harassment. I decided then that I wouldn't just rebuild my fence. I would build it stronger, higher, and with comprehensive surveillance. If Debbie wanted a war, I would give her one, but on my terms, with every move legally documented and bulletproof. As I sifted through Linda's documents, I discovered something shocking. The trail across my property wasn't just for Jason's recreational ATV riding. It appeared to be connected to a secret real estate development plan that Debbie, as a broker, would profit from handsomely, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Suddenly, her obsessive determination made perfect sense. The documents Linda provided were like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. Among them were email exchanges between Debbie and a developer named Robert Coleman, discussing plans for a luxury resort development on the large parcel of land behind the forest that bordered my property. The emails dated back 18 months, long before I purchased my home. One message explicitly mentioned securing access through the Nelson property, my uncle's name before I inherited it, as being crucial for caustic development. Having a direct path through my land would save the developers hundreds of thousands of dollars in road construction costs, allowing them to bypass wetlands and difficult terrain. The most damning document was a private investment agreement showing Debbie wasn't just the broker for the deal, she was a silent partner with a 10% stake in the development. What made this discovery particularly disturbing was the evidence showing Debbie had actively blocked several other potential development projects in the area over the past 5 years, citing community character concerns through her HOA position. Yet here she was, secretly supporting and investing in a development that would bring considerably more traffic and environmental disruption. There were also notes about deliberately keeping the plans quiet until they had secured all necessary access rights, with Debbie writing that the fewer people who know about this before it's a done deal, the better. I spent the next day researching Robert Coleman and discovered he was a major developer with close ties to local government, including Mayor Wilson. His company had been involved in several controversial projects, often navigating around environmental regulations through political connections. The mayor's brother-in-law even sat on Coleman's corporate board. This explained how Debbie had been so confident in her threats. She had powerful allies and significant financial motivation. My property was literally the missing puzzle piece in his grand plan, the access point that would make the entire project financially viable. I decided to reach out to Emily Clark, a reporter for the local newspaper I had met briefly at a community event. I have information about a potentially unethical real estate development that involves conflicts of interest with our HOA leadership, I told her cautiously. I'm gathering evidence, but wanted to put this on your radar. Emily seemed intrigued but professional. I'd be interested in learning more once you have your documentation organized, she replied. I didn't share everything with her yet, wanting to build a rock-solid case before going public. Meanwhile, Debbie escalated her campaign against me. Within days, I received official HOA violation notices for trivial issues. My garbage can left out 12 hours too long, a garden hose visible from the street, supposedly unapproved flowers in my front beds. My neighbors reported receiving emails from Debbie, warning them about declining property values due to my non-compliance. Then, most alarmingly, I received an official city citation for unauthorized structure construction regarding my fence with Mayor Wilson's signature at the bottom. The citation claimed I needed permits I'd never heard of and threatened significant daily fines. I immediately contacted Tom Jenkins, who reviewed the citation with concern. This is unusual, he noted. These kinds of permits are typically only required for commercial properties or historical districts. He made some calls to contacts at City Hall and discovered something interesting. Mayor Wilson and Debbie Richardson had been seen having lunch together multiple times in recent months. Tom's research uncovered another crucial detail: a pending application for rezoning of the forest area from protected green space to mixed-use development, filed just 3 weeks earlier. The application had been fast-tracked, bypassing several normal public comment periods. They're moving quickly now, Tom observed. Your fence must have spooked them. If they lose easy access through your property, the entire economic model of their project falls apart. I decided it was time to take more decisive action. First, I hired a professional security company to install a comprehensive surveillance system covering every inch of my property. Next, I contacted a different fencing company to rebuild my fence, this time with concrete footings, steel reinforcements, and using every specification in the HOA guidelines to make it unassailable from both a physical and regulatory standpoint. While the work was underway, I created a secure digital archive of all the evidence I'd collected: security footage, recordings of interactions with Debbie, Linda's documents, the property surveys, the fake citations, and the email exchanges revealing the development plans. I also consulted with the land use attorney recommended by Tom, who confirmed my property rights and the illegitimacy of the city citation. The new fence was completed in record time, and I added signs warning of video surveillance. The very morning after it was finished, my security system alerted me to motion at the fence line at 5:45 a.m. The crystal-clear video showed Jason and two friends arriving on ATVs, carrying tools clearly intended for vandalism. What they didn't realize was that I was watching the live feed and had already called Officer Parker, who arrived just as they were starting to damage the fence. Officer Parker issued citations for criminal mischief and trespassing and called their parents to the scene. Debbie arrived 20 minutes later, alternating between berating the officer and trying to minimize her son's actions. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and began composing an email. The recipients: every HOA board member, Emily Clark from the local paper, and most importantly, the district attorney's office. The subject line was simple: evidence of corruption and property destruction at River Oaks Estates, with video attachments. It was time for my final move. The email I sent was comprehensive and meticulous, a digital bombshell designed to expose the entire corrupt system at once. To the HOA board members, I provided evidence of Debbie's abuse of power, her selective enforcement of rules, and her conflicts of interest. To Emily Clark, I offered an exclusive story about corruption in local housing governance and development, with all the supporting documentation. To the district attorney's office, I submitted evidence of potential criminal activity, the vandalism, threats, harassment, and what appeared to be collusion between Debbie, Robert Coleman, and Mayor Wilson to manipulate property access for financial gain. Within hours of sending the email, my phone began ringing nonstop. Board members wanted to distance themselves from Debbie, Emily wanted an interview, and an investigator from the DA's office wanted to meet. The local news website posted a breaking story with the headline, "HOA Scandal: Power, Profit, and Intimidation in River Oaks Estates." The article detailed the allegations against Debbie, the video evidence of vandalism, and the connections to the planned development project. Debbie's response was swift and predictable. She called me, screaming about defamation lawsuits and how she would destroy me. I recorded the call, of course, adding it to my evidence file. She then issued a public statement claiming she was being targeted by a vindictive new resident, and that all allegations were completely false and defamatory. Robert Coleman, the developer, moved even faster to save himself, issuing a press release announcing the indefinite postponement of the resort project and claiming he had no knowledge of any improper actions by any parties involved in preliminary discussions. Within 48 hours of my email, the DA's office announced they were reviewing serious allegations of corruption and conflicts of interest involving HOA leadership and local officials. Mayor Wilson suddenly canceled several public appearances, citing health concerns. Steve Williams called an emergency HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for the following evening. The fallout continued throughout the day. Linda Cooper publicly acknowledged providing me with the internal HOA documents, stating she felt ethically obligated to expose the misuse of power. Other neighbors came forward with their own stories of intimidation and selective rule enforcement. By evening, a petition was circulating among homeowners demanding Debbie's removal from the board. Debbie, seeing her carefully constructed power structure crumbling, made one desperate final move. That evening, Jason and three friends drove up to my house in broad daylight. From their aggressive approach and the baseball bats visible in their hands, their intentions were clear. What they didn't expect was my preparation. As soon as they stepped onto my property, motion-activated floodlights illuminated the entire yard, and a pre-recorded announcement played through outdoor speakers. "You are trespassing on private property. You are being recorded, and law enforcement has been automatically notified." Simultaneously, my security system sent alerts to both my phone and Officer Parker, who I had previously warned might need to respond quickly to further harassment. The teens froze in the sudden brightness, clearly visible to all my cameras and several neighbors who had come outside to see what was happening. They panicked and ran back to their vehicles, only to find Officer Parker's police cruiser pulling up at the end of my driveway, blocking their escape. The officer calmly approached the group, separating them for questioning and calling their parents. When Debbie arrived 30 minutes later, her face contorted with rage as she saw her son sitting in the back of a police car. I could hear her shouting from inside my house, "This is harassment! My son was just visiting a neighbor. There's no law against that." Officer Parker's response was measured but firm. "Mrs. Richardson, your son and his friends are being detained for trespassing and menacing. They approached a property they've previously vandalized, carrying weapons after dark. Given the documented history, their intentions seem clear: Jason and his friends were taken to the station for formal questioning, and Debbie followed in her car, screaming threats all the way. That evening, my phone rang again. It was Steve Williams. "Ethan, this has gone too far," he said, sounding genuinely distressed. "I've called an emergency executive session of the board before tomorrow's public meeting. I think we need to ask for Debbie's resignation." His voice lowered. "I should have done something sooner. I knew about some of her behavior, but I never imagined it went this far." I appreciated his candor, but remained cautious. "Why are you telling me this, Steve?" There was a long pause. "Because I'm going to need to make a statement tomorrow acknowledging that I failed in my oversight duties. I turned a blind eye to her behavior for too long." He hesitated again. "And because I wanted to warn you that Debbie knows about the emergency session. She's furious, and I'm concerned about what she might do tonight." I thanked Steve for the warning and immediately called Officer Parker to request additional patrols near my house overnight. The officer agreed, adding that Jason and his friends had been released to their parents with strict warnings and that formal charges were being considered. As I prepared for the HOA meeting the next day, reviewing my presentation and evidence one final time, I reflected on how quickly everything had escalated. What had started as a simple property boundary dispute had exposed corruption reaching to the highest levels of local government. Tomorrow would be the final confrontation, where I would not only demand Debbie's removal, but proposed a complete reform of the HOA structure. The battle over my fence had evolved into something much larger, a community's chance to reclaim control from those who had abused their power for personal gain. When Officer Parker called Debbie to inform her that Jason had been arrested for trespassing and menacing, I could hear her screams through the phone from 10 feet away. But this wasn't the end. The final move would play out at tomorrow's HOA meeting, where I would not only demand Debbie's resignation, but propose a comprehensive reform of the entire HOA structure. The community center meeting room was filled beyond capacity for the emergency HOA meeting. Residents stood along the walls, and a local news crew had set up in the back. Emily Clark had brought reinforcements. The tension was palpable as Steve Williams called the meeting to order, his voice slightly shaky. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you may be aware, serious allegations have been raised concerning HOA governance and potential conflicts of interest. Tonight we need to address these concerns as a community." He nodded toward me. "Mr. Miller has prepared a presentation that I believe everyone should see before we proceed with any decisions." As I walked to the front of the room, I noticed Debbie sitting alone in the corner, her normally perfect appearance disheveled, her expression a mixture of defiance and fear. Gone was her usual entourage of supporters. No one wanted to be associated with her now that the full story was emerging. I connected my laptop to the projector and began a methodical presentation of the evidence. First, I showed the HOA's own records, demonstrating how Debbie had selectively enforced rules against those who opposed her, while ignoring violations by her allies. Next came the documentation of her involvement in the development project and the financial stakes she had concealed from the community while using her HOA position to try to secure access through my land. I presented the timeline of escalating harassment, the vandalism, and the attempts at intimidation. Finally, I played edited highlights from the security footage showing Jason's repeated trespassing and the 2 incidents of property destruction. Throughout my presentation, the room remained silent, except for occasional gasps or murmurs, as particularly damning evidence appeared on screen. Debbie stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. When I finished, I proposed a series of reforms: regular electronic voting on all major HOA decisions to increase participation, term limits for board members, transparent financial record-keeping, and an ethics committee composed of rotating community members. What happened to me could happen to any of you, I concluded. This isn't just about one person abusing power. It's about creating a system where such abuse becomes impossible. Steve Williams stood up as I returned to my seat. "Thank you, Ethan. Before we open the floor for discussion, I have something to say." He took a deep breath, visibly struggling. "I've served as HOA president for 8 years. And during that time, I've failed in my oversight responsibilities. I was aware of some concerning behavior, but chose to look the other way, partly out of personal regard for Mrs. Richardson." He looked directly at Debbie for the first time. "I was wrong, and I apologize to the community. While I'm not implicated in any of the more serious allegations, my inaction enabled the situation to develop. I'll be submitting my resignation after this meeting, effective once a transition plan is in place." His unexpected confession shifted the mood in the room. Several people called out support for Steve, suggesting he should stay and help implement reforms instead. Others demanded immediate action regarding Debbie. Finally, Debbie herself stood up, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "This is nothing but a witch hunt, based on manipulated evidence and personal vendetta. Ethan Miller moved into our community and immediately set out to destroy our traditions and governance structure. Yes, I was involved in the resort development as a real estate professional. That's my job. There was nothing improper about it." She gestured dismissively toward the screen where evidence of her concealed financial stake was still displayed. "As for my son, teenagers make mistakes. Criminalizing normal teenage behavior because of a petty neighborhood dispute is disgraceful." The room erupted in response, with multiple residents standing to refute her claims. Maria Martinez's voice cut through the chaos. "Debbie, you reported my elderly mother for having a wheelchair ramp that was 1 inch too wide. Don't talk about criminalizing behavior when you've weaponized HOA rules for years." After nearly an hour of heated discussion, Steve called for order and proposed a vote. "All those in favor of requesting Debbie Richardson's immediate resignation from the HOA board, please raise your hands." The result was overwhelming. All but 3 people voted in favor. "The motion carries," Steve announced. "Mrs. Richardson, the board formally requests your resignation, effective immediately." Debbie stood up, her face flushed. "You'll be hearing from my attorney. All of you." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The remainder of the meeting focused on implementing my proposed reforms. Linda Cooper was nominated as temporary vice president until proper elections could be held, and a committee was formed to revise the HOA bylaws. As the meeting concluded, I found myself surrounded by neighbors introducing themselves, offering support, and sharing their own experiences with Debbie's reign. For the first time since moving in, I felt part of a community, rather than an outsider under siege. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. The district attorney's office brought minor charges against Jason for vandalism, with a diversion program requiring community service rather than criminal prosecution. Debbie faced more serious consequences, an investigation into conflicts of interest and real estate fraud that ultimately resulted in the suspension of her broker's license. Mayor Wilson announced he wouldn't seek re-election to focus on family, and the planned resort development was permanently shelved after the publicity revealed environmental concerns that had been overlooked. I was invited to join the HOA Reform Committee, where my technology background proved useful in implementing transparent electronic voting and record-keeping systems. The new fence remained in place, though I eventually added a small gate with a lock, allowing walking access, not ATVs, through by permission as a goodwill gesture. 1 year later, River Oaks Estates had transformed. The HOA operated with unprecedented transparency and community involvement. Debbie had moved away after losing her real estate license, unable to face the community where her reputation was irreparably damaged. Jason, having completed his community service, had matured considerably and even approached me to apologize. He focused on his STEM teaching career and became a well-respected educator at the local high school. To mark the anniversary of the HOA reforms, I hosted a barbecue on my property, including the once contested trail area. Nearly the entire neighborhood attended, a symbol of healing and community renewal. As I watched children playing and neighbors chatting where once there had been conflict, I reflected on the journey. Sometimes, a fence doesn't just separate, it defines clear boundaries in both property and relationships. You don't have to be a bad guy to protect what's yours, and you certainly don't need to be a Karen to have a voice in your community. Standing up against bullying ultimately protects not just yourself, but everyone around you. And yes, I still maintain that fence to this day. A perfect reminder that clear boundaries make good neighbors.
At QA Stories, we don't just tell stories, we let the chaos speak for itself. If this one blew your mind, wait till you see what's next.